"We don't have time to follow some mutt into the woods," I snapped, waving the rest of the rescue crew forward. "People are trapped. Every second counts." I'd regret saying that for the rest of my life. The dog had been barking like mad, tail whipping the air, darting back and forth like he was begging us to notice something. We had just pulled up to the outskirts of the flood zone, where the water had swallowed up the lower valley overnight. Trees were bent, mud thick as wet cement, and whole sections of road had caved in. The sky was a heavy gray, pressing down on us with a threat of more rain. And this dog, shaggy, golden, soaking wet, and covered in bramble, was the first living thing we'd seen since our convoy rolled in. "Probably just scared," Jeff muttered, adjusting his hard hat and checking the tablet that tracked reported distress signals. "I don't know," said Riley, squinting at the dog. "He keeps running that way and coming back, like he wants us to follow him." "I said leave it," I barked. "Come on." And so we left him. We moved fast that morning. There were families to pull out, roads to clear, basements to wade through. Every call came in with a new address, new urgency. I was leading Rescue Unit 2 out of Franklin County, mostly volunteers, farm boys, teachers, retired vets who just wanted to help. I took pride in keeping them focused. In a disaster like this, distractions could cost lives, even four-legged ones. Still, that dog kept showing up. Every hour or so, we'd see a flash of gold behind the trees or catch his bark over the wind. He stayed close but never let us near him. Just barked, ran off, came back again. At one point, I turned and caught Riley staring into the woods. "Don't even think about it," I said. Riley didn't argue, but I saw his jaw tighten. By early afternoon, we'd rescued 6 people from flooded basements and 1 elderly couple from the roof of their mobile home. My boots were soaked through. My radio buzzed non-stop. We stopped for 10 minutes to eat granola bars and rehydrate near the fire engine parked on a slope above the washed-out creek. That's when the dog came back. This time, he stood right in front of us, barked once, stared straight at me, then turned and ran. Riley stood. "We should check, just in case." "Fine," I grunted. "You've got 15 minutes." I watched him disappear through the trees, the dog bounding ahead like he knew exactly where to go. 10 minutes later, Riley radioed back. "Cap, you're gonna want to see this." We followed the signal through thick brush and fallen limbs. And then we saw it. A rusted blue pickup truck flipped onto its side in a ditch, nearly invisible from the road. Mud had nearly covered it, but one window was cracked open, and a faint hand had been waving from inside. 2 teenagers. They'd been trying to drive out of town before the worst of the flood hit. Road had given out beneath them. They'd been there all night, low on oxygen, and terrified no one would find them. Except someone had. The dog stood by the truck, tail wagging hard enough to shake his whole body. From that moment, everything changed. We pulled the kids out, got them onto stretchers, and called in backup. The girl, Jessica, kept asking about the dog. Said she'd seen him through the window that morning, barking and digging like crazy. "He saved us," she whispered. We didn't argue. The rest of the day blurred past me. I kept seeing that golden blur out of the corner of my eye. The dog never stayed long. He'd vanish again, only to show up near another trapped car, another family needing help. It was like he had a map we didn't. I started listening to him. That night, after the worst of the rain had passed, I found Riley sitting beside the dog under a makeshift tarp. "He's not chipped," Riley said quietly. "No tags. Nothing. Somebody lost him in the storm? Maybe. Or maybe he found us." The dog looked up at me, eyes tired but bright. I reached out slowly. This time, he let me scratch behind his ears. "I owe you an apology, buddy," I murmured. He licked my wrist once and curled into Riley's lap. We ended up calling him Scout. Over the next week, Scout didn't leave our side. He led us to 4 more people. An elderly man stuck in a root cellar, a boy separated from his parents, a woman who'd broken her leg trying to climb out a second-story window. Every time, Scout barked, ran ahead, and waited for us to catch up. Word got around quick. News crews showed up. People sent in donations, toys, treats. Someone even offered to buy Scout outright. "A hero dog deserves a good home," they said. But Scout wouldn't leave Riley's side. Or mine. He had work to do. Even after the floodwaters receded and the roads reopened, Scout stayed with us. He'd jump into the truck bed every morning like he was clocking in. He'd nudge us toward areas we hadn't planned to search. And sure enough, someone always needed help there. We never found out where Scout came from. No one claimed him, and maybe that was for the best, because somehow it felt like he had shown up just for this, just for us. One morning, I watched as Scout stood at the edge of the field, staring into the dawn like he saw something we didn't. Riley walked over, rubbing his eyes. "Think he's still got more to show us?" "I'd bet on it." And just like that, Scout turned and trotted off again, tail wagging, nose low to the ground, barking once. We followed. "To be continued." "He's doing it again," Riley said, pointing. Scout was pacing by the edge of the gravel road that curved away from the main search grid. We'd already marked the area as cleared, but there he was, ears perked, body stiff, tail wagging in sharp, fast strokes. He let out a single bark and started trotting ahead. "Maybe he smells something," I muttered, glancing down at the updated search map. "Or maybe he's just restless." Riley was already moving. "We're following him." "Hold up." I caught up beside him. "We've got 2 more calls north of the ridge. A stranded family and someone missing a cat." "I've got a feeling," Riley said. "And so does he." I sighed, but waved for the rest of the crew to carry on toward the ridge. "All right, let's see where this goes." Scout led us into a stretch of forest where the trees grew in tight, and the storm had left behind a tangle of fallen branches and washed-out ditches. The mud was slick, sucking at our boots with every step. The air smelled like soaked pine and mildew. I kept thinking we should turn back, that we were wasting time, that this was probably nothing. But then Scout stopped. His ears twitched, and he barked twice, staring down a slope where the ground dipped toward a cluster of boulders. Riley stepped ahead and crouched. "There's something down there." We scrambled down the hill and found a tent, half collapsed and buried in leaves. The fabric was ripped. Inside, a small fire pit lay cold and soggy, and nearby, we saw the glint of a metal thermos. "Anyone here?" I called. No answer. But Scout was sniffing hard now, circling the tent, nose to the ground. Riley pulled back a corner of the tarp that had fallen. Underneath was a backpack, some clothes, a photo in a plastic bag. This guy didn't just set up camp. He was living here, Riley murmured. Scout barked again and started up a narrow trail that wound around the rocks. "We're going after him," I said into the radio. "Might have a missing hiker or camper. Get someone to check recent reports." 15 minutes later, we found him. A man, maybe in his 60s, lay wedged between 2 boulders, a makeshift walking stick snapped beside him. His ankle was twisted badly. He looked up when he heard us coming. "Help," he rasped. "Thank God." We got him out, splinted the ankle, and carried him up the hill on a rescue board. His name was Leonard. Said he'd been hiking for solitude, didn't have cell service. And when the storm came through, he slipped trying to move his supplies to higher ground. I kept yelling, he said, gripping my arm as we loaded him into the truck. Didn't think anyone would find me. Then I heard a dog barking. Thought I was dreaming. Scout sat beside the stretcher, tongue out, tail wagging calmly. You weren't dreaming, I said. That dog's real, and you're not the first he's found. Leonard looked at Scout like he was staring at a miracle. That was how it kept going. Day after day, Scout led us into places we never would have searched on our own. Overturned cars, damaged sheds, basements filled with water where someone had climbed up into the attic to stay dry. He never barked unless it mattered, never chased squirrels or rabbits. He only moved with purpose. He was a rescue dog without training, a guide with instincts better than our tech. The rest of the crew started calling him Chief. Scout's more his name, I reminded them. He scouts ahead. Yeah, but he runs the place, one guy laughed. We're just here to carry out orders. Even the higher-ups took notice. The regional director came down to shake our hands, smiling for the camera with Scout at the center. The photo ran in 2 local papers and made its way to a small spot on the evening news. People started showing up with gifts, bones, collars, plush beds. Scout sniffed them all politely, but stayed with us, sleeping in the back of the truck or beside Riley's cot. One night, after the generators shut down, I found Riley and Scout sitting out under the stars. You ever think about keeping him? I asked. Every day, Riley said. But he's not mine. He's everybody's. You think he's still looking for someone? Maybe. Scout stood up then, stretched, and walked over to rest his head on my boot. The next morning, we were called out to the edge of Millersfield, where the water had knocked out the back wall of a small family home. The father had been rescued by boat 2 days earlier, but they hadn't found his son. We were told he might have tried to head to the neighbor's barn when the creek started rising. Scout led us straight there. We waded through knee-high water and found the boy, 10 years old, huddled beneath the hayloft, shaking but unharmed. He'd been too scared to yell and had run out of food. Scout sat beside him until we wrapped the boy in a blanket and carried him out. Is he your dog? The boy asked Riley, voice trembling. No, Riley said softly. He's yours now, too. I didn't cry often, but something about that moment hit hard. Later that afternoon, a woman in a wide-brimmed hat came walking toward us from a nearby house. Is that him? She asked, looking at Scout. We tensed. Was she his owner? I think he came from the other side of the creek, she said. I saw a dog like that before the storm, always hanging around the Miller farm. The Miller farm had been abandoned for years. Are you sure? Riley asked. Pretty sure, but that house got wiped clean by the flood. Don't think there was anyone left. We checked the farm anyway. Nothing but debris, broken fencing, and scattered beams. No signs of life. Riley found an old kennel buried under mud near the barn. It was unlocked. Empty. We looked at Scout. He looked back, eyes calm. Maybe he was waiting for help, I said. Or maybe he ran when the water came, Riley added, and then decided to help someone else instead. Either way, the farm gave no answers. That night I dreamed about Scout running through the storm, alone, weaving between trees, hearing cries no one else could. In the dream, he found us by mistake and stayed on purpose. The next day, something strange happened. Scout refused to eat. He sniffed the kibble, looked up at Riley, and walked away. We tried cooked chicken. Peanut butter? Cheese? Nothing. He's not sick, Riley said, concerned. He's just distracted. Scout kept pacing by the gate, staring out toward the ridge where the woods thickened and the hills started to climb. "Maybe he's telling us something again," I said. We packed light and followed. For nearly 2 hours, Scout led us through narrow trails and up slopes slick with moss. Then he stopped by a cluster of rocks and barked sharply. Riley stepped forward and knelt. There was a shoe, a child's shoe. Nearby, we found a trail of torn fabric caught on brambles. Scout sniffed, barked again, and bounded ahead. "I'm calling it in," I said, flipping on the radio. "We've got something. Send backup." 30 minutes later, we found her. A girl, maybe 6 or 7, clinging to a tree stump where the land dropped off into a ravine. She'd been missing for nearly 3 days. Her family had assumed she'd been swept away. "Can't believe she's alive," Riley whispered as we pulled her up. "She wouldn't be," I said, "if it wasn't for him." Scout stayed beside her the whole time. He nudged her hand gently with his nose until she smiled. Back at the base, her parents wept and hugged him like he was part of the family. The sun dipped low that evening. Everything was quiet for once. Scout finally ate his dinner. We sat around the fire later, a few of us sharing stories, the air soft with the sound of crickets. Riley scratched Scout's back and said, "How many lives does that make now?" "Too many to count," I said. But the count wasn't over. Not yet. To be continued. Scout had a way of knowing when something was wrong before we did. It wasn't just instinct. It was like he could read the air, the ground, the expressions on people's faces. Sometimes I'd catch him standing completely still, head tilted, just listening to something we couldn't hear. That morning, he did it again. He stood on the loading dock of the temporary command post, looking toward the line of trees behind the parking lot, and barked once, short, sharp. Riley looked up from where he was sorting fresh supplies. "He's pointing again." "Where's the call log?" I asked, already walking toward the truck. "Any reports from that direction?" "Nothing since yesterday," Riley said, jogging after me. "We swept it twice." Scout barked again and began to trot toward the woods. "We should follow," I said, grabbing my vest. "He hasn't been wrong yet." We radioed in and followed him into the underbrush. The trees thickened quickly, vines twisted around trunks, and the ground was still wet from last week's rain. Scout moved with that steady, determined pace. Sniff, pause, run. We climbed a low ridge, then dipped down toward a narrow ravine, barely visible on the maps. Scout slowed, his nose pressed to the mossy earth, then barked once more. "What is it?" Riley called. I scanned the ground. There, broken branches, a drag mark, something that could have been a boot print. "Over here," I said, moving ahead. We found a man halfway down the slope, clinging to a fallen log. He was pale, shaking, his lips cracked. "Help me," he rasped. "Please. I can't move." We scrambled down and stabilized him. He'd broken 2 ribs and twisted his knee badly. Said his name was Bill Hanley, from a town 20 miles out. He'd driven out to help clear trees with his cousin, got separated, and slipped down the ridge trying to find his way back. No cell service. No water. Nothing but the sound of birds. And eventually, a barking dog. "I thought I was going crazy," he said as we helped him into the gurney. "Then I saw that face, that golden mutt, looking at me like I was late to something." Scout stood nearby, tail thumping the dirt slowly, watching. "You're not late," I told him. "You're right on time." Back at the station, more stories rolled in. People heard about Scout on the radio and started calling in from towns we hadn't reached yet. Some were rumors, a dog spotted leading a hiker out of the woods, a mutt seen by the side of the road before a crash victim was found. Not all of them could be Scout, but the legend was growing. We tried to keep things grounded. There were still homes to check, roads to reopen. One woman called sobbing, convinced her husband had been washed downstream. Scout stood quietly by, as she explained through tears that no one had found his body, just his backpack, caught in a tree. She begged us to look one more time. "Scout?" Riley asked softly. The dog lifted his head. She lived out near Maple Hollow, a winding stretch of woods flanked by fast-moving creeks. The area had already been logged as searched, but we went anyway. Scout led the way, nose down, moving faster than usual. After an hour of trudging through brush and sinking into muddy banks, Scout stopped. He barked twice. Then he ran down a narrow deer trail. We followed and found a man wedged in a ravine, clinging to a log like a lifeline. He was conscious, barely, skin scratched and eyes wild. He'd been trying to follow the creek when the bank gave out. "Eric!" I shouted into the radio. "We found him!" Scout lay down beside the man and rested his chin near the outstretched hand. The man coughed and managed a whisper. Is that the dog from the news?" We laughed. Riley nodded. "Yeah, it is." Once Eric was airlifted out, Scout trotted to the back of the truck and curled up like he'd just finished a shift at the office. He worked like that every day. We didn't even need to give him commands. He just knew. Some mornings he'd pace near the edge of the base camp until we geared up. Other times he'd be up before dawn, sniffing at the tents like he was trying to pick someone to go with him. He liked Riley the most. They moved like a pair. If Riley stopped, Scout stopped. If Riley got nervous, Scout would bump his leg with his nose and push him forward. One afternoon, we were on break near the eastern ridge. A news crew showed up again, cameras buzzing. "Can we get footage of the dog in action?" one asked. "No," I said flatly. They looked stunned. "But he's a hero." "Yes," I said, "which is why we're not putting him on command." Scout didn't care for attention. When cameras pointed at him, he'd trot off into the trees. That evening, while checking the supply tent, I found a letter addressed to the dog. Inside was a child's drawing of Scout, complete with a little red collar and a heart above his head. The note said, "Thank you for finding my grandpa. You're my hero. Love, Sam." I showed it to Riley. He looked down at Scout and said, "We should put it up in the truck." So we did. Days blurred into each other. The worst of the disaster had passed, but the recovery dragged on. Families trickled back to what remained of their homes. Some rebuilt, some walked away. Scout kept working, even when it rained, even when we were exhausted. He didn't ask for rest. But eventually I noticed him slowing down. Not a lot. Just small things. He'd sit sooner, drink more water, take longer naps under the tarp. Riley started bringing an extra blanket for him. One night I saw Scout limping slightly as he came back from a run. "You all right, buddy?" I crouched beside him. He licked my hand and lay down. "He's tired," Riley said quietly. "We all are." The next day, Scout didn't point. He didn't bark. He just sat beside Riley and looked out over the ridge. "Let's give him a break," I told the team. "He's earned it." But just after noon, a radio call came in. A boy had gone missing from a cleanup crew. Last seen walking near the western ditch, collecting tools. Thought he saw a rabbit. Followed it, didn't come back. Scout stood up the second the call ended. We didn't need to say anything. We just followed. The trail was cold. No footprints. The ground was packed hard from days of movement, but Scout moved confidently, sniffing, pausing, then pushing forward. After nearly 2 hours of winding through unfamiliar trails, he stopped. There was a scrap of flannel caught in the brush. We picked up the pace. Riley called the boy's name, and soon we heard a faint answer. A single, scared, "Hello?" Scout took off. We found the boy in a hollow, knees scraped, one shoe missing. "You're okay," Riley said, kneeling beside him. "You're safe." The boy looked up at Scout and burst into tears. "That dog found me," he sobbed. "I didn't think anyone was coming." We hiked back slowly, the boy holding tightly to Scout's neck the whole way. That night, we gave Scout an entire roast chicken. He ate every bite. I stayed up late, sitting beside the truck with a flashlight and a map. Scout came over, dropped his head into my lap, and let out a long breath. "You've done enough," I whispered. But he didn't stop. The following week, Riley got a call from a fire captain out of state. They'd heard about Scout and wanted to know if we'd let him come up and assist with their recovery team. Riley looked at me. "What do we say?" "He's not ours to loan," I said. "He chooses where to go." Scout came over, curled up on Riley's boot, and closed his eyes. Maybe that was his answer. To be continued. The first real frost came early that year. You could smell it in the air when the sun came up. Crisp, sharp, like the trees themselves were holding their breath. Scout didn't seem to mind. He trotted through the thin layer of frost on the grass, like it was just another morning, tail high, nose twitching as we packed the truck. "More blankets today," Riley said, tossing an extra fleece into the gear bin. "And boots, ground stiff as brick out there." I nodded, watching Scout circle the clearing twice before stopping near the water tank and sniffing the ground. "You think he's ready for another day?" I asked. "He's already ready. He's always ready." We'd learned not to question it anymore. Scout knew where we were needed before the calls even came in. Most of the rescue crews were rotating out now, heading back to normal life. Our team stayed behind, taking on mop-up operations and answering any lingering distress calls that trickled in from remote properties. It was quieter now, but not over. Not yet. That morning, we were called out to a 2-lane road leading into the hills, where a tree had fallen onto a small camper. The driver had managed to crawl out, dazed but mostly unharmed. He swore he heard a dog barking just before the crash. "Let me guess," I said as we pulled up. "Golden coat, tail like a feather duster?" The man nodded. "He came out of the woods and stood right in the road. I slammed the brakes, and the tree fell not 5 seconds later. If I hadn't stopped..." We looked at each other. Scout was already sniffing the edge of the broken trunk, tail wagging once. Riley gave him a pat. "That's 12. "More than 12, I said. "We just stopped counting." By mid-afternoon, we'd cleared most of the debris and logged 2 other minor calls. Scout stayed close, never straying far. But around 4 p.m., just as the sun dipped below the treetops, he froze. He stared northeast, toward the ridgeline beyond the rail tracks. Ears up, muscles tensed. Then he barked. Once, loud, urgent. Riley was already lacing his boots. "That's the signal." I sighed, checked my pack, and radioed the base. "Unit 2 following up on an animal lead northeast quadrant. No active reports, but we've got a live trail. We'll update." Scout led us through thick brush and over a shallow creek where ice had started to form on the edges. He moved faster this time. Focused. Determined. After a mile, we came across an old hiking trail. The signs were faded, and parts of the path had collapsed from erosion. Scout sniffed the air, turned left, and broke into a jog. It took another 30 minutes before we saw what he'd found. A car, half hidden under pine branches and covered in frost. It had veered off the road and crashed down an incline, landing nose first in a ditch. The windshield was cracked. The back door hung open. "Anyone inside?" Riley called. Scout barked again and ran past the vehicle. We followed him down a slope, weaving through low brush. That's where we found her, a young woman, barely conscious, propped against a fallen tree. Her coat was torn, and her hands were red with cold. Her name was Emily. She'd crawled out of the crash the night before and tried to find help. Scout lay beside her as we checked her vitals. "I didn't think anyone would come," she whispered. I smiled. Someone did. After we got her warm and called in evac support, Emily looked down at Scout. He was barking. That's what woke me up. I think I was gone for a while, but he kept barking until I opened my eyes. Scout tilted his head, then rested it gently on her shin. Back at camp, the medics took over. Riley poured Scout a bowl of water and added 2 pieces of sausage left over from lunch. "That's a good day's work," he said. Scout licked his chops and settled down in the patch of sun left between the truck and supply shed. But the day wasn't done. An emergency call came in just before nightfall. A fire had broken out near a remote trailer compound used for seasonal workers. 2 people were missing. The area was isolated. Rough terrain, no clear access for trucks. "I don't like it," Riley muttered. "Too many things can go wrong in the dark." "We've got lights, gear, and each other," I said. "And him." Scout was already up, waiting by the truck's open door. We made the hike in 45 minutes, the smoke growing stronger as we neared the site. A collapsed fire pit had ignited nearby brush, and it had spread faster than anyone expected. Most of the compound was safe now, thanks to quick action from a forestry crew, but the missing individuals, a father and daughter, had gone to check the water pump and never returned. Scout didn't need direction. He headed west, away from the main path, into the thicker trees. His barking came sharp and fast now, a clear signal. We followed. Downed branches, scorched grass, and a sharp drop-off led us to a shallow ravine where the 2 had taken shelter. The father had twisted his ankle trying to carry his daughter out. He waved both arms when he saw our flashlights. "Over here!" he cried. "I was shouting, but I didn't think anyone heard." "We didn't," Riley said, reaching him. "But someone else did." The girl, maybe 9 or 10, clung to Scout like a life raft. "He found us," she said. "He came out of the trees like he was looking just for us." We got them both out safely. The following day, the mayor stopped by the temporary post with a crate of treats and a big handmade sign that read, "Scout, our guardian." The whole team signed it. Scout sniffed the box, took 1 treat, and laid the rest of the day in the shade, eyes half closed, tail flicking every few minutes. "Think he's winding down?" Riley asked. I shook my head. "No, he's just saving energy." We weren't wrong. That night he woke me up. I was sleeping in the back of the truck, and I felt a nudge on my boot. Scout stood there, staring at me, then at the trees. "What is it?" He barked once. Then he ran. I didn't even radio. I just grabbed my light and followed. Scout led me toward the edge of camp, past the old barn we'd been using for storage. The wind was picking up. The trees creaked. Then I heard it. Crying. A soft, high-pitched whimper. Behind the barn, tucked beneath the splintered overhang, was a dog. Thin, dirty, barely standing. And beside her, 4 puppies huddled together, shivering. Oh my. Scout lay down quietly near the entrance. He didn't bark, just watched. I crouched and slowly approached. The mother dog growled weakly but didn't move. I kept my voice low, gentle. You're all right now. We've got you. By the time Riley came running, I'd wrapped the pups in my jacket. The mother let me lift her without a fight. Back at base, we set them up in the supply tent. Blankets, water, food. One of the medics checked them over. Nothing broken. Just hungry. Cold. Lost. Scout sat near the edge of the tent the entire time, keeping guard. You knew, I whispered, rubbing his ear. You always know. Riley crouched beside him. Maybe that's where he came from. Maybe someone found him once. Maybe that's why he keeps finding others. Scout didn't answer, just closed his eyes. But I thought I saw his tail wag once, slow and steady. To be continued. The frost had thickened into ice. The mornings were colder now, breath fogging in the air before we even had our gear on. Each step across the hardened ground crunched underfoot, like stepping on old leaves, frozen in place. Scout didn't slow down. If anything, the chill seemed to give him more energy. He darted through the brush like a younger dog, tongue lolling out, pausing only to glance back and make sure we were keeping up. Riley rubbed his hands together near the truck, then blew into them. Feels like the season's turning. It is, I said. But Scout hasn't turned off. The makeshift rescue base had thinned out. Most of the emergency tents had been taken down. Only a skeleton crew remained, mostly folks like us who weren't in a rush to leave or who didn't know how to walk away yet. There were still calls coming in, but fewer. And everyone felt a little heavier now. That morning's call was from a utility worker named Dale, who'd been driving to inspect a downed power line when a rock slide blocked the road. He'd tried to hike back toward the main highway, but never made it. We got the coordinates off the last ping from his radio, but signal in those hills was spotty at best. The dispatchers had told us they didn't expect much, probably a dead battery or a misread trail. Scout disagreed. We were barely 10 minutes into the hike when he stopped dead in his tracks, sniffed the wind, and barked once. That bark again. The one that meant, come on, now. We moved fast. The terrain was tough, loose shale and deep gullies, but Scout didn't hesitate. He leapt across a broken fence line and barreled through a thicket of bare branches. When we caught up, we saw Dale sitting at the base of a tree, legs stretched out, radio still in hand. His left leg was clearly broken, but he waved and grinned the moment he saw us. Thought I was going to be here all night, he said. But then I heard that dog barking like he knew me. Riley dropped to his knees beside him and began checking his vitals. You're lucky. This isn't an easy place to find. Dale reached out and gave Scout a clumsy pat. He found it. By the time we got him back to the main road, the rest of the crew was already there to help load him up. Dale refused to let go of Scout until the very last moment. You've got a gift, he whispered to him. Scout didn't react much, just blinked slowly and sat by the tire of the truck until the ambulance pulled away. Back at camp, the puppies were thriving. The mother dog, who we'd started calling Willow, had gained some weight, and the pups were starting to explore beyond their bed. Scout watched them closely, but didn't interfere. Every now and then, one of the pups would waddle toward him, and he'd nudge it gently back toward Willow. He's their uncle now, one of the medics joked. They'd be dead if it wasn't for him, I said. That evening, I walked down to the old barn where we kept the backup generators. Scout followed, stopping only to sniff the wind again. When I turned to look at him, he was staring hard toward the west, past the tree line, into the part of the valley we hadn't been to in over a week. "You got something?" I asked. He barked once. We radioed it in. Riley and I grabbed packs, headlamps, and food. We'd learned by now not to ignore his signals, even if it was late, even if it was cold. Scout led us through the woods for more than an hour, up through narrow trails and down into hollows where the frost clung thick to the ground. We didn't see anything. No signs of distress, no recent footprints. Riley checked the map 3 times. "This area wasn't marked for follow-up," he said. "We're here now," I replied. Scout kept going. We crossed a shallow creek and reached an old cabin, half collapsed, with ivy twisting around the porch beams. Scout sniffed at the door, then turned and barked again. We pushed inside carefully. The place smelled like damp wood and dust. The furniture was broken down, old mattresses stacked in the corner. But in the back room, tucked beneath a pile of blankets, was a man. He looked to be in his 70s, frail, thin, with a tangled white beard. His breathing was shallow, his skin pale. "He must have been squatting here," Riley whispered. I stepped forward and touched his shoulder gently. "Sir, can you hear me?" His eyes opened slowly. You're not the dog," he said hoarsely. "No, but he's here." Scout walked to his side and sat down. We wrapped the man in thermal blankets and called for assistance. It took nearly 2 hours to get a team to the site with a stretcher, but he stayed awake the whole time, talking in short bursts. Said his name was Walter, had been living off the grid for over a decade. "I knew the weather was turning," he muttered. "Didn't think it would turn so fast. Didn't think anyone had come." We brought him back, gave him soup. He thanked us, but he didn't stop looking at Scout, like he was trying to understand something. "I had a dog once," he said. "Looked just like him. Long time ago. He died during a snowstorm, right in front of the stove. Never left my side." Scout nudged his arm gently. "I wonder sometimes," Walter murmured. "If maybe some dogs don't really go. Maybe they just keep looking for more people to help." I didn't know what to say to that. Later, back at my cot, I watched Scout sleep. The wind howled outside. The tents flapped. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. But Scout didn't stir. He lay curled tightly, nose tucked beneath his tail, as calm as I'd ever seen him. The next day, a teacher from a local school visited the base. She brought letters from her students, more drawings, stories, thank yous written in colorful crayon. One kid wrote, "Scout is the best dog in the world. If I get lost, I want him to find me." We pinned the letters up on the inside of the supply tent. That afternoon, Scout led us to an overturned ATV halfway down a steep ravine. A teenager had crashed it while trying to haul supplies to a neighboring farm. He'd broken his arm and couldn't climb back up. His phone had fallen in the water. Scout found him in minutes. We barely even talked on the way back. Just worked, moved, got the job done. Scout trotted along at our side like it was the most natural thing in the world. That night, Riley sat beside the fire pit, staring into the flames. "You think he'll stay when it's over?" "I don't know. He could have a home, a warm bed, no more mud, no more cold nights. He already has all that. He just chooses something different." Riley glanced down. Scout was sleeping beside him, head resting on Riley's boot. "He's more than a dog," Riley said quietly. "He's something else." I didn't disagree, but I didn't know what that something was. To be continued, Scout stood at the window of the command trailer, watching the snow fall in thick, lazy flakes. It was the first real snowfall of the season, a soft blanket over everything. Branches, power lines, and the collapsed sheds near the edge of base camp. The sky was gray, quiet. I don't think I'd ever seen him look so still. He wasn't tired, not exactly. He was waiting. Riley walked in with 2 mugs of coffee, steam curling above the rims. He handed me one and gave a little nod toward Scout. He's thinking again. He always is. The room was quiet, except for the occasional crackle of the radio and the distant hum of the generator. Snow muffled everything else. I stepped to the window and crouched beside Scout, scratching gently behind his ear. "Is it someone else today?" I asked. "Or something we missed?" Scout didn't move, didn't blink, just stared out at the snow. At 8:17 a.m., the radio chirped. "Dispatch to Unit 2. We've received a report from the eastern perimeter. Woman says her father hasn't come home. Thought he might have gone to clear a path behind their property. Trees down everywhere. Name's Ray McConnell, late 60s, heart condition." I looked at Riley. He was already pulling on his coat. "We're going." Scout was waiting at the door. The woman met us on her porch, bundled in a heavy jacket, tears in her eyes. Her hands shook as she passed us an old photo and pointed toward the woods behind their house. "He always tries to do too much," she said, "even when he shouldn't. He hates asking for help." Scout sniffed the air once, then bolted into the trees. It was quiet in the woods. Snow muffled every footstep, every branch that broke underfoot. Scout moved in that now familiar way, pausing, turning, sprinting ahead, barking once to tell us where to go. The trail bent hard around a ridge. We followed it until we reached the creek. There, crumpled beside a downed log, was Ray. He was conscious, barely, his face pale, lips tinged blue, one hand clutched over his chest. Riley dropped to his knees instantly, checking his pulse. "Call it in," he said without looking up. I relayed coordinates, radio crackling as I tried to keep my voice steady. Scout sat beside Ray, leaned in, and gently rested his head on the man's shoulder. Ray turned his face slightly toward the warmth and whispered, "I'm sorry." He wasn't talking to us. Maybe he wasn't talking to anyone in the present. I think he was remembering a moment, a mistake, a lost dog or friend, something that echoed inside of him when Scout touched him like that. The medics arrived just in time. By the time we hiked back, the snow was falling harder. The air smelled like pine and clean earth. Scout moved slower now, his legs stiff from cold, but his head was high. The base camp was almost empty. A few cots, a couple of supply crates, some tarps still held down with bricks. The mother dog and her pups had been transferred to a foster home 2 days ago. One of the younger medics offered to adopt them. We sent food and a note with Scout's paw print stamped at the bottom. It was strange without them. Quieter, but Scout didn't seem bothered. He just moved to the center of things, wherever we went, and waited to work. The next 2 days were slow. No new calls, no missing people. The power had come back to most of the county, and only one emergency shelter remained open. But Scout didn't rest. He patrolled the perimeter, checked the creek beds, sniffed the wind every morning like he was expecting something to change. On the 3rd morning, it did. A young man from the Forestry Service called in to report a smell. Said it was coming from a hollow just west of an old mining road. Couldn't get to it because of the snow, but it was strong enough to be something serious. Scout didn't need convincing. We drove as far as the road would take us, then strapped on snowshoes and hiked the last 2 miles. The wind was picking up, and drifts had covered most of the old tracks. The hollow dipped sharply, lined with thick spruce and loose rock. Scout led the way, fur dusted white. When he stopped, it was at a cluster of rocks near a partially buried pickup. The front end was crushed, and the cab had caved in on the driver's side. We found the man behind the wheel. It was too late. He'd gone off the road during the first storm and hadn't been found in time. But Scout didn't bark, didn't whine. He just stood beside the truck, unmoving, eyes steady. "It still matters," Riley said quietly. "It always does." We marked the scene and called for recovery. Then we stood for a while, just us and Scout, watching the snow fall again. By the time we returned to base, the forecast was calling for a major blizzard. All remaining crews were told to stand down by midnight. Roads would be impassable by dawn. "I guess that means we're done," I said that night, standing beside Riley at the edge of the tents. "Until spring," he said, "or the next time something breaks." Scout lay beside us in the snow. He didn't shiver, just rested. Later, inside the trailer, I sat down with a notebook and wrote down every name I could remember. The people he'd found, the places he'd led us, the moments that didn't make the news, but mattered just as much. I filled 10 pages, probably forgot some. Scout sat at my feet the whole time. "You've done more for this town than anyone," I told him. He looked at me once, then rested his chin on his paws. The next day, before the blizzard rolled in, Scout led us to the last place I ever expected, the cemetery. We didn't plan to go there. We were heading out to secure an old equipment shed when Scout veered off, tail up, nose low, and took a hard left past the fire break. We followed, because that's what we did now. No questions. He stopped beside a crooked stone near the back of the cemetery, one half covered in snow. The inscription was faint. The date had faded. But the name was clear. Max. We stood in silence. Riley crouched and brushed the snow from the base of the stone. A small metal tag lay buried beneath it. A collar. Rusted, old, but still legible. Max, good dog, 1997 to 2009. Scout sat, just sat. We stayed with him until the sky darkened. "Was this home?" Riley whispered. "Is that where you came from?" Scout didn't move. But somehow, we knew. We didn't leave until Scout stood, stretched, and turned back toward camp. And we followed. To be continued. The blizzard came fast. Winds pushed through the hills like freight trains, dragging snow with them in great white curtains that erased the landscape one tree at a time. You could stand outside and watch entire sections of forest disappear into the white. Everything was silent but for the wind. Even the birds were gone. We were the only team left at base camp. Everyone else had cleared out in the last 24 hours, either sent home or reassigned. Power was down again. Generators ran on rotation, and only one tent was warm enough to sleep in. We didn't care. Scout didn't either. He stood just outside the tent flap, nose in the air, ears twitching, tail still. He hadn't barked once since the night at the cemetery. But he didn't rest either. He stayed alert, moving from window to door to trees, over and over. I finally stepped out with my coat zipped to my chin and clapped my gloves together. "We're not going anywhere in this weather, you know." Scout didn't look at me, just took a few steps toward the snow-covered clearing and sat. Riley came out a minute later, thermos in hand. He's waiting again. I know. We stood there for a while, watching the wind tear through the branches. Late that afternoon, a weak signal came through the radio. Static, a woman's voice, faint, panicked. Anyone copy? This is Catherine Lewis. Stuck. My truck's in a ditch. I can't. Riley snapped to action. Did you get coordinates? Barely. I squinted at the blurred numbers. Somewhere north of Pine Hollow. That road's a mess in good weather. Scout was already at the truck. Let's go, I said. We're the only ones left. No one else is coming. We packed rope, flares, emergency blankets, and extra fuel. Tires were fitted with chains. Scout curled into the back seat without needing a command. It took us 2 hours to reach the turnoff toward Pine Hollow. The snowplows hadn't touched this stretch. Trees sagged under the weight of snow. At one point, we had to get out and move a fallen branch by hand. Visibility dropped to 10 feet. Then Scout barked. I slammed the brakes. There, barely visible under a drift, was the back end of a white pickup truck. We waded through waist-high snow, calling out, "Catherine! Catherine Lewis!" From inside the cab, we heard a faint knock. Riley yanked the door open. She was there, curled under a coat, shaking, eyes red from crying. "I didn't think anyone heard me," she whispered. "I tried the radio. The battery was dying. It's okay," I said. "We heard you, and so did he." Scout jumped up onto the snowbank and poked his head into the truck, tail wagging. Catherine let out a choked laugh and reached for him. "He looks like a dream," she said. "He's real." We got her out, wrapped her in a foil blanket, and walked her back to the truck. She kept one hand on Scout the entire way. That night, after she was safely at the county shelter, we returned to base and radioed in a full report. No one responded. Not surprising. Most of the central dispatchers had packed it in. We sat in the warm tent, boots drying near the heater, eating what might have been the last of the real food. Scout lay curled between us. Riley broke the silence. "You think he hears people? Like voices? No, I mean, hears them the way we can't. Not just sound. Intention, fear, hope." I didn't answer. I didn't know how to. 2 days later, once the snow softened, we got another call. A rancher from the other side of the ridge had gone to check on his cattle before the storm hit and never came back. His sons had just reached town that morning after digging out the truck. Said they found a note on the table, said he'd only be gone an hour. Scout didn't wait for directions. We loaded up again and headed east. The snow was deeper on that side. We hiked for nearly a mile past the main fence line, following Scout as he weaved through drifts and over half-frozen streams. Then he stopped near a broken section of barbed wire and sniffed at the edge of a ditch. Riley spotted the footprints first. One boot, then drag marks. We followed the trail through a copse of birch trees and came upon the man lying beneath a tarp, face bruised, ankle clearly broken. He blinked up at us like we were ghosts. "Didn't think I'd wake up again," he mumbled. "But I heard something, like barking in a dream." Scout stood over him, tail swishing slowly. We hauled him out with a sled, careful of the leg, careful of the ice. It took the better part of an hour to get him to the truck. He never took his eyes off Scout. "Not just a dog," he said. "He's like a searchlight." That night, a local journalist called Riley, asked if they could run a full feature on Scout. The headline was going to be, "The Dog That Never Left Anyone Behind." Riley turned it down. "He's not done yet," he told her. "When he's done, you'll know." We didn't sleep much that week. Too many small emergencies. A gas leak in a remote trailer. A chimney collapse. A man trapped in a deer blind when the ladder gave out beneath him. Every single time, Scout led us there before we finished reading the call. It got to the point where we stopped taking the calls seriously until Scout reacted. If he didn't bark, we sent someone else. If he did, we followed. One night, after a long rescue that ended with a tractor being towed out of a frozen creek, I found Scout lying in front of the command trailer, staring up at the stars. "Bet you've seen more of the world than I ever have," I said quietly. He turned his head, met my eyes, then looked back at the sky. That same night, Riley found a note tacked to the door of the mess tent. No name. Just a message scrawled in neat handwriting. "To the golden dog and the men who follow him, my son is home because of you. I couldn't find you in person, so I left this. Please know that our family will never forget. If you ever need anything, we'll be there." Scout sniffed the note once, then padded off toward the woods. Riley folded it and slipped it into his pocket. "I'm keeping that," he said. "No one else needs to see it." I nodded. I knew exactly why. As the snow began to melt, the creek swelled again. Not dangerously, but enough to bring debris down from the mountains. A canoe overturned near the bend. We pulled it out, empty. No name, no ID. Scout didn't bark. He walked to the bank and stood there, nose in the air, eyes fixed on the water. He waited. We waited with him. The current slowed by sunset. Nothing came downstream. Still, Scout didn't move. I sat down on the bank. Riley stood behind me. "He knows something," I said. "He always does." The next morning, a young woman arrived at the edge of camp, soaking wet and covered in mud. She'd been hiking upriver when she slipped. Said she lost her pack and had no idea how to get back. Hadn't seen anyone in over a day. "Then I saw a dog," she said. "Golden coat, standing on the riverbank. He looked at me, really looked at me, and then he just walked into the trees." We exchanged glances. Riley stepped out and whistled. Scout came jogging from the rear of camp like nothing had happened. The woman's eyes widened. "That's him." Scout wagged his tail once, then plopped down at Riley's feet. Later that night, as we packed for yet another emergency call, I paused and looked around. The tents, the fading snowbanks, the trail Scout had worn into the dirt from months of pacing. It all looked different now. Not because the place had changed, but because of how we saw it. Scout had led us through a disaster. But more than that, he'd made us pay attention to things we'd have missed. People we might not have saved, places we would have never gone. And somehow I knew he wasn't finished yet. The mud came next. After the snow melted and the frost pulled back from the soil, the earth softened like bread dough. Every step sank an inch or more. Tires spun in place. Boots had to be hosed down just to see laces again. It was messier than the flood ever was, but not in a way that made the news. This part of the aftermath was slower, stickier, quiet. But Scout didn't slow down. Not when the wind cut through our jackets or when the snow came down sideways, and not now. He moved through the mud like it didn't matter. And maybe it didn't. Not to him. He only cared about one thing, finding whoever needed him. The days were longer now. The sky opened up wider in the evenings, letting in pink and lavender clouds that smeared across the horizon like watercolor. The forest had started to wake up again. Birds returned. Small animals skittered through the brush, but the damage from the storms and floods still showed. Trees snapped in half, sinkholes hidden under leaf cover, and whole sections of fencing missing. We were running low on supplies, but no one talked about that much. Riley made a run into town once a week to restock what he could. I stayed behind with Scout, covering the grid. Even with fewer emergency calls coming in, there was always something to do. One morning, Scout led me to a trail that hadn't been used in months. It was overgrown and muddy, with water pooled in the lower dips. We hadn't received any alerts from this section, but Scout pushed forward anyway, sniffing hard. A few hundred yards in, we found a bicycle lying half buried in the brush. It was rusted, but recent enough. The tires hadn't completely deflated yet. A backpack sat nearby, open and soaked through. I radioed Riley. "Found a bike and a bag, no one in sight yet. Possible hiker or local kid, following Scout." "Copy that," he said. "Want backup?" "Not yet." Scout moved with more urgency now, weaving through the trees, nose low. He barked once, a short sound, clipped and direct. I picked up my pace. We found the boy about 15 minutes later, curled under a fallen log with a twisted ankle and dried blood along his temple. He stirred when Scout barked again. "Hey," I said gently, kneeling beside him. "You're all right. We've got you." He looked past me and locked eyes with Scout. "That's the dog from the radio," he said. "The rescue dog." I nodded. "That's him. He's really real?" "As real as mud and sky." Scout sat beside the boy while I wrapped his ankle. He didn't move, didn't shift, just kept his gaze steady, calming. The boy's name was Luke, 12 years old. Got lost riding trails he wasn't supposed to. Didn't tell his parents where he was going. He'd been out there for more than a day. "You're lucky he found you," I said. "I heard barking. That's what woke me up. Thought I was dreaming." "Nope, that's just Scout doing his thing." We got Luke back to his house by early evening. His parents were waiting in the driveway, faces white with worry. When they saw him, their knees buckled. The dad dropped into the mud, crying and laughing at the same time. Then they both turned to Scout. "He found him?" the mom asked. I nodded. She knelt in the mud and hugged Scout. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you, thank you." Scout stood calmly until she let go, then shook the mud off his coat and trotted to the truck. Back at camp, Riley handed me a plate of food and poured fresh water for Scout. "He's not slowing down," he said. "If anything, he's picking up speed again." "There's still people out there," I said. "I know, but I don't know how long he can keep doing this." I looked over at Scout, now curled beneath the heater, his tail flicking in his sleep. "He'll stop when it's time," I said, "but that time isn't now." The next day, we received a call from the state park office. A ranger had gone out to repair a weather station and hadn't checked back in. The signal was faint, and the GPS ping was unreliable. The area was vast, cliffs, ravines, deep woods. We didn't hesitate. Scout was already at the truck. The hike in was rough, mud deeper than before, and sections of trail washed out entirely. Trees had fallen in tangled heaps. We moved slowly, carefully. Scout led us around hazards we never saw coming. At one point, he barked sharply and blocked our path. Just ahead was a sinkhole, masked perfectly by leaves and branches. Riley threw a stick, and it vanished into the pit. "Good catch," I told Scout. He just turned and kept moving. We found the ranger near dusk, wedged into a ditch beneath a fallen log. His leg was broken, and he'd lost his radio when the log gave way. "You found me," he gasped. "I didn't think. I thought—" "Scout did," Riley said. He stared at the dog for a long time. "I've read about him. Thought it was just a good story. Didn't know he was real." "Very real," I said. We built a splint and carried him out on a stretcher improvised from branches and rope. The whole time, Scout walked beside him. By the time we reached the road, it was full dark. The stars were bright and sharp above us. The ranger reached out and patted Scout's head. "Thank you," he said, "for more than just me." We returned to camp in silence. The next morning, a journalist arrived uninvited. He'd heard about Scout and came hoping for a photo or a quote. Riley spoke with him while I sat with Scout near the fire pit. The man tried to snap pictures, but Scout turned away each time. Eventually, he gave up and left. "He doesn't do it for credit," Riley said when he returned. "Doesn't want a spotlight." "Nope," I said. "He's got work to do." And that work kept coming. A hiker trapped under a rock slide, an older couple stranded in a broken-down RV, a woman who fell through the porch of her cabin and broke 2 ribs. In every case, Scout led the way. No mistakes, no delays. One night, I walked to the edge of camp and found Scout staring into the woods. "You still hear them, don't you?" I said. He turned and licked my hand once, then sat beside me. The wind moved through the trees like a whisper, and we waited. To be continued. The sound of spring came slow that year, like a cautious return rather than a celebration. Patches of green began to sprout between stretches of stubborn brown. Birds started singing again, tentatively at first, then louder with each new sunrise. Melted snow soaked the hillsides, and the air smelled of wet pine, thawed earth, and something else. A feeling, maybe. Something final. Scout woke before me that morning. I heard his paws move across the tent floor, the soft thud of his tail brushing canvas. By the time I stepped outside, he was already perched on the slope that overlooked the stream, watching the fog lift from the water. Riley came up beside me with a cup of coffee, steam curling past his cheeks. "He's been out there for an hour, just sitting." "He knows," I said. "Yeah, I think we do too." The calls had stopped. For 2 weeks now, the radio hadn't buzzed with anything urgent. No missing people, no last-minute searches, no wayward hikers or stranded drivers, just normal chatter, weather updates, and the occasional check-in from the ranger station. The roads had been cleared, power restored. Families returned to what was left of their homes. The worst was over. We were still here. Scout stood and turned toward us. He didn't bark, just walked to Riley, pressed his head into his leg, and waited. We packed without speaking. Routine now. We filled the truck with what supplies we had left, tied down tarps, folded cots. The base camp was nearly empty. One final cleanup team was coming in the next day to dismantle the command trailer and portable generator. After that, the field would go quiet again. "Where to?" Riley asked as he tightened the last strap. Scout didn't move, just walked to the edge of the tree line and looked back once. We followed. He led us through the familiar woods, the paths we'd walked hundreds of times by now. The air was warmer, but still cool enough to see your breath if you exhaled slow. We hiked for a long time, longer than usual. Not fast, not urgent, just steady. A farewell pace. Then we saw it. An old farmhouse, one we'd passed a dozen times in the first few weeks of the flood response, back when we thought it was abandoned. The structure was sagging in places, the paint long faded, porch steps missing. But smoke rose gently from the chimney, and a wind chime rattled faintly from the eaves. Scout walked straight up to the door and sat. It opened slowly. An old man stepped out. Weathered face, strong frame, eyes squinting against the light. He looked down at Scout and let out a sound somewhere between a gasp and a laugh. "Well, I'll be," he said. "I didn't think I'd ever see you again." Riley and I exchanged a glance. "You know him?" I asked. The man nodded. "I sure do. Or I used to. Raised one just like him. Bam eyes, one walk. Saved my boy once when he fell through the pond out back. That dog was everything." He knelt and stroked Scout's back. "He died on this porch 10 years ago. But when the flood hit and I couldn't get out, I saw a dog standing in the trees. Just like him. Thought I was losing my mind." "You were trapped during the flood?" He nodded. "For 2 days. No power. No signal. Then one night, I heard barking. When I woke up, I followed it. Found my way to a rescue station down the road. They thought someone had sent a team out. I never told them about the dog." Riley looked down at Scout. "He found you." The man scratched behind Scout's ear. "Feels like he came full circle." We stayed a while. Had coffee on the porch, swapped stories. The old man's name was Henry. Lived alone now. Said he didn't mind. "Quiet's not a curse," he told us. "It's just space to remember." When we finally stood to leave, Scout didn't follow. He stayed seated beside Henry, tail still, eyes soft. Riley crouched down. "You staying here?" Scout looked at him, then leaned forward and pressed his forehead to Riley's chest. Just once. A firm, quiet touch. Then he turned and lay down at Henry's feet. Neither of us said anything for a while. Then Riley nodded. "All right, okay." I reached out and brushed Scout's head. "You've earned this." Henry said he had extra blankets, fresh food, enough space, said it wouldn't be the first time he shared his home with a dog that had seen too much. We left the rest of our extra supplies with him. Emergency rations, a first aid kit, Scout's favorite rope toy, though he hadn't played with it in weeks. When we got back to the truck, Riley sat in the passenger seat for a long time, staring out the window. "He's done," he said finally. "Yeah." The drive back was silent. We packed up the last of camp that evening, folded the tents, rolled the cots. I took one last look at the trail Scout had worn behind the mess tent, the patch of ground where he always lay after a rescue, watching the sky like he was reading the weather through the stars. I don't know if it was closure. I don't think that's what Scout was ever looking for. But there was peace in the quiet that settled after he was gone. A steadiness. A few months later, Riley got a letter in the mail. No return address. Just a photo tucked inside. A golden dog lying on a sunlit porch, one paw draped over Henry's boot. Behind them, green hills rolled out under a wide blue sky. The caption on the back said, "Still watching. Still here." That photo hangs above the firehouse kitchen now. No plaque, no frame, just pinned there with a thumbtack, like it's always belonged. Sometimes new recruits ask about it. Riley just points and says, "That's Scout. If you ever get lost, keep an ear out for barking." And that's all they need to know, because wherever someone is waiting, hoping, calling out in the dark, Scout already heard them. And if he's not coming this time, it's only because he knows someone else will.